Nightwolf High School, the school where I worked my last year before retirement. Boy, am I glad it was the last, because that's when things began to get strange. There was this one guy who was in my biology class. He seemed normal at first, but became more strange as the year went by. This black kid just wouldn't stop making my bones shiver. On the third week of school, the students started to become familiar to me. I was getting to know them more and more each day, except for this one kid named Evan Slane. I hardly even noticed him during the first 3 weeks of school because he didn't say much and all he did was keep a book in front of his face. But this one day I caught him breaking the rule of the cell phone policy. He was surfing the web on his cell phone while I was teaching, so I had no other choice but to swipe it from him. "Evan, cell phone please," I told him, holding my hand out, letting him know to hand it over. He stared at me for a second with a slightly angry expression. He finally handed it over before crossing his arms in his desk. As I spoke a few words to the class, I headed over to my desk and dropped Evan's cell phone on it, only to turn around and see Evan on his cell phone again. I froze and stared in disbelief. Other students in the class were giving me a mysterious expression. But how? At that moment, I could have sworn I just took that phone away from that kid. Did he have 2 cell phones? I glanced back on my desk and saw that the black ZTE Android phone was no longer there. I trotted back over to Evan's desk and saw it in the palms of his hands instead. My jaws dropped after figuring this out. "Evan, do not play on phones in my class," I said firmly, snatching the cell phone out of his hand and trying to pretend I didn't see what I just saw. When I went and put the phone on my desk again and spun around, yep, you guessed it, he was on the phone again. When looking on my desk a second time, the phone of course had disappeared. I just didn't know what to think of what was going on. "Evan, I will not tolerate this foolishness in my class. Now when I take that phone this time, I expect it to stay taken," I shouted, going over and taking the phone for a third time. This time when I turned around, all the students in the class were gone, except for Evan. He sat in his desk glaring at me from the corners of his eyes. I glanced around the room totally shocked. "Where did everyone go?" I asked Evan. He didn't answer. He just stared at me. "Evan," I shouted angrily. I was getting no type of conversation out of this kid whatsoever. His glaring eyes began to suddenly glow green, and the class became very dim. I screamed. Evan stood up out of his desk and began making his way over to where I was. As those spooky and demonic eyes came closer to me, my fear intensified at every second. "Stay away," I cried, pressing myself against the large dry erase board behind me. He pinned me down, then let out a very deep and demonic roar in my face. I screamed again, closing my eyes at the same time. But when I opened them again, it was all over. The students were still gone, but now Evan was gone. The dimness in the room was gone. The room was looking normal again. I hopped up and dashed my way out of the classroom and through the crowd of kids in the hall. I went to the main office and yelled, "Mrs. Laney, Mrs. Laney." The secretary and another lady in the office looked at me awkwardly when seeing how hard I was breathing. Mrs. Laney came cruising out of the small rooms in the back. "Mrs. Laney, look in the files and look up a student named Evan Slane," I said, still breathing hard. She also stared at me awkwardly, as if I was acting weird. Okay? I don't think I've met a student yet or even heard of him yet. But if you wish, I'll take a look into the records," Mrs. Laney said, making her way over to the file cabinet. She dug and searched through the files for about 20 minutes, then she looked at me with a face full of confusion and said, "Well, I'm sorry, Mrs. Gretzky, but according to the files, a student named Evan Slane never existed."